Welcome everyone. Okay, we're starting to even out and I would hate to eat into any more of the time. So let's go ahead and get started. Good evening and welcome to Copperfield's Books virtual event with Dawson Church. My name is Jamie Madsen and I'm the Marketing and Events Coordinator here at Copperfield's Books, and I'll also be your host for the evening. Copperfield's Books has been committed to literature, education, and creating community together since our founding in 1981. As COVID-19 continues to endanger the future of indie bookstores like us, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you all for your continued support this year. I know this has been an extremely tough year and we wouldn't be here without you, so thank you. I'm also thrilled to remind you that all 9 of our stores are open for both inside service and curbside pickup. Just a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce tonight's author. We will be using the chat box to provide links to view upcoming Copperfield's events, links to purchase Dawson's brand new title, as well as a 10% discount code for use on our website. And we'll also include my contact details for post-event information. Additionally, the Q&A box will be your go-to tonight with any questions or comments for the author. The format will feature around 30 minutes of speaking and will be followed by a live Q&A. We will end the event with a 15-minute meditation, so we're all super lucky to be here tonight. As always, we will try to get to as many of your questions as possible, as your feedback is always welcomed. If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see an icon that says Q&A. Please submit your questions here rather than replying to my post in the chat box. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce tonight's author, Dawson Church. Dawson is an award-winning author whose best-selling book, The Genie in Your Genes, has been hailed by reviewers as a breakthrough in our understanding of the link between emotions and genetics. He founded the National Institute for Integrative Healthcare, and his groundbreaking research has been published across prestigious scientific journals. Dawson is the editor of Energy Psychology, Theory, Research, and Treatment, a peer-reviewed professional journal. He also shares how to apply the breakthroughs of energy psychology to health and athletic performance through EFT Universe, one of the largest alternative medicine sites on the web, which I will be sharing the link to later. Dawson is with us tonight to discuss Bliss Brain, the neuroscience of remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity, and joy, which demonstrates that flow states rapidly remodel the brain for happiness. Again, I'm so excited to have you here with us this evening, Dawson, and I truly can't wait for the meditation. And why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Jamie, thank you so much. I so appreciate Copperfield's for hosting me. And I'm so delighted that despite the pandemic and all the ups and downs we have to deal with, that independent bookstores are thriving and that you're still there and you're finding ways to get the word out, like through this Zoom broadcast. So I'm really grateful for you. Again, there's a Copperfield's bookstore in the town I live in, another one where Jamie lives, and they're really central to our community. So please do support your independent bookstores. They mean a lot to us, and that's the way they will continue. And Jamie, again, has already put the link to buy my book, Bliss Brain, in the Zoom chat over there. And so I want to make this big leap right now from where we are now to where we can be. And it's a huge leap, going from the kind of swirling confusion, fear, doubt, all the things people are dealing with right now. I know my best friend lives in Forestville, California, and he was supposed to visit, and he was getting away from the smoke and the flames of a nearby forest fire. He went into a hotel room to try and really not have to deal with it. Went a long way away, and then suddenly I got the word he was moving to North Carolina. So, people are really being affected by the current crop of things, and if you aren't bothered by the forest fires or by the smoke, then maybe you're bothered by the election. If you aren't bothered by the election, maybe you're bothered by the pandemic or the economic crash, but the general level of societal stress now is definitely high. And before this, we had stress. Before all this hit, people were already stressed. I've done several randomized controlled trials of cortisol, your main stress hormone. And I find that people are often walking around, even though long before any of these big, large-scale problems, they were walking around with high levels of stress, high levels of cortisol. And cortisol ages you. Ages your memory and learning centers in the brain, ages your skin, ages your muscle mass and bone density, and people are a lot more stressed than they need to be. And of course, we evolved to get stressed. It was stress that kept your ancestors alive. So when your ancestors 100,000 years ago were moving, say, through the savannah, through the jungle, they needed to be highly alert, looking for the bad stuff, because the bad stuff was there behind every blade of grass, around every corner, whether it was a python in a tree or a crouching tiger hiding in the bushes. There were dangers and threats at every turn, intense competition among various groups of humans for resources. And so it was an environment where we evolved this ability to pay attention to the bad stuff and to really be hyper-focused, hyper-vigilant on anything that could be going wrong in our environment. And that's how we survived. And in fact, the most stressed people, the most hyper-vigilant people were the ones that had the genes that produced cortisol the quickest in response to stress, and they tended to survive. The ones that were happy-go-lucky, the ones that were less stressed, tended to get weeded out of the gene pool. And so generation by generation, we became more and more and more stressed as a species until today. No more tigers, no more snakes, nothing is going to jump out behind the trees and grab us. But we still walk around very often as though we were in that archaic environment. And that stress level is high. It really compromises our health over time. Now, this might seem like a really horribly depressing bunch of things to say if you have tuned in to hear about my new book, Bliss Brain. And Bliss Brain is really interesting because there are people who, despite all of the challenges of history, have thrived. St. Francis of Assisi lived at a very difficult time. The Indian saint Ramakrishna lived at a time of huge social, political upheaval in India. Saint Teresa of Avila lived at a time of big change in Spain with the Catholic Church. And a lot of these saints and people, mystics, the Tibetans, we do MRI scans of these Tibetan monks, and they're totally blissed out. I mean, they're in these blissful states, but of course, Tibet was invaded by China in the 1950s, and those Tibetan monks, many of them fled, lost their homes. A lot of Tibetans were killed. A lot of those Tibetan monks were tortured, and yet we put them in an MRI now, and they are living in Bliss Brain. They're in Bliss Brain. How do they do that? And they're doing it despite these circumstances. So it is not true that you need to have been born with a silver spoon in your mouth, that everything has to be just perfect around you to be in Bliss Brain. I start the book. Now, this is a science book. It's a popular science book. It explains science, but it has 2 chapters where I talk about my own personal story. And one of those chapters is chapter 1, and it begins with a wildfire. I was woken up on October 9th, 2017, by my wife shaking me by my shoulder and saying, "Dawson, something's really wrong." I looked out the window. There was a glow on the horizon. That's not a good thing. I looked at my alarm clock and said, 12:45 a.m. I got out of bed, walked toward our outside deck to look outside, and suddenly all the lights went out, the power went out in the whole area, and I saw this wildfire racing down the hill toward us. I yelled at my wife, "We're getting out of here right now." Now, I'm not a screamer and a yeller. I'm a pretty placid meditator. And when I said it with that emphasis, she knew it was serious. We literally ran through the house, grabbed our car keys, sprinted for the car. And as we drove out of our long driveway, she felt heat on the top of her head. My wife looked up through the top of her head, up through the moonroof, and all of the branches above her head were on fire. We drove out through this inferno of swirling ash, and looked like a snowstorm. There was so much ash and cinders just being blown horizontally by winds that were around 70 miles an hour. We made it out. We were lucky to make it out. Many people did not make it out that night. 5,400 homes were destroyed in Santa Rosa, California on the night of the Tubbs fire. 22 people died. 8 of those were within 1,000 yards of our home, because the fire was moving at the speed of a football field every 3 seconds. People just couldn't get out. We were very lucky that my wife woke me up, and we were able to get on in time. So this isn't just a book about the theory of having a bliss brain and being in bliss brain. It's about my own experiences of having to work with my own flashbacks and nightmares. I had all the symptoms of PTSD after the fire, and I needed serious help to recover from them. So the book does tell my story in a couple of chapters. After that, we had a big financial crash. I'll tell you about that in chapter 7. I also had to have an operation as a result of injuries sustained, as a result of all the stuff that happened after the fire. So it wasn't exactly an easy year for me. And so what did I do in that year? I wrote a new book called Bliss Brain. Isn't that what everyone does in the year after a fire and burns down their house? Then the next day, a friend of ours got in past the National Guard and sent us a photograph, 2 photographs actually, of our property. We had a big rural property with an office building and a bunch of outbuildings and a large collection of cars. And so she sent us these 2 images, and they're really just crazy images. And they show just concrete slabs, a concrete slab with everything, just ash. The fire burned so hot in that particular spot. It melted glass, melted metal. We couldn't even tell where the washer and dryer had been. They were just like, the metal was all melted. And so that was our reality after the fire. And yet we recovered, and we went on to shift our lives. We meditated, we used EFT tapping, we used all kinds of things to help ourselves recover. And we recovered really quickly. In fact, one day, just a couple of days after the fire, we were staying at a motel all the way out at the coast, and we'd seen these images of our house totally destroyed. And after meditation, my wife and I began to say, you know, it's not all bad. There were things in the house we hated. Like there's an old massage chair in the garage that I was supposed to sell on Craigslist. I'd been sitting there in the middle of the garage, taking up space for a couple of years, hadn't got around to selling it, and suddenly I realized I get to cross that one off my list. Is that a thrill or what? So we were resilient. And how do you grow a brain of resilience? So the MRI studies and EEG studies of these Tibetan monks who've been tortured, some of them, but they have 10,000, 20,000, sometimes 60,000 lifetime hours of meditation, tell us how you can be happy even in trying times. And you aren't just happy as a state. So I can be happy as a transient state. I can feel good. I can feel joyful. I can feel compassionate. All of those are states. They come and they go. What we find with these Tibetan monks and with Franciscan nuns and various other groups, we find these with Qigong masters. We find these with indigenous healers, shamans. What happens is that these traits of resilience, creativity, and joy aren't just temporary states. They're long-term personality traits. And I cover the work of Nobel Prize-winning researcher Eric Kandel in my book, Bliss Brain, and he showed that in a series of remarkable experiments that if you pass a signal through a bundle of neurons over and over and over and over again for an hour, 1 hour, the number of synaptic connections in that bundle doubles. Which means that if you're practicing joy, if you're practicing transcendence, if you're sitting in meditation, you're losing your sense of clinging to your little local story, and you're becoming one with the divine, one with the universe, then you're sending signals through those neural bundles, and Hebb's law says neurons that fire together, wire together. You develop bigger and stronger signaling capacity around those neural bundles of joy, resilience, creativity, and bliss. And then you develop that as a personality trait. It moves from being a state to a trait. And that's not just the way you feel, it's the way you are. And that was the difference with my wife and I. We were resilient people. We meditate. We use EFT acupressure tapping. We have strong social connections with other people. We spend time in nature. We do all kinds of things that are helpful. And I see that Jamie just put links there in chat to my other book, the Eft Manual. That is the most potent stress reduction technique I know. There are over 100 clinical trials showing it produces rapid reductions in anxiety, depression, phobias, and PTSD. We used EFT. I'm the author of the Eft Manual. Obviously, I should have used EFT. Used EFT, really, really powerful. And it's a remarkable treatment, self-help treatment for stress. So she's got that over there in the chat box over there. I really encourage you, if you do 2 self-help techniques, and again, I cover about 30 of them in my books, but of the 2 that you want to make sure are part of your stress reduction toolbox, one is EFT and the other is meditation. And not just any meditation. You need to use effective meditation. And in my new book, Bliss Brain, I ask the hard questions. I ask questions that no one has ever actually asked and answered clearly in a science book before. Like, how much meditation do you need? I mean, do you need to do an hour a day? Is 2 hours a day twice as good as 1 hour a day? How long before you start to trigger brain changes? Is group meditation better than solitary meditation? Are online groups as effective as in-person groups? I ask and answer all the difficult questions about meditation, but they aren't beliefs and they aren't a form of spirituality. They're just what science tells us. I just call the shots and say, this is the study, this is what it says, and this is how to meditate effectively and scientifically. Now, when people do this, they start to shift their brains, and all kinds of parts of the brain shift the way they function. The part of the brain that makes you suffer is called the default mode network. I mentioned that your ancestors were paranoid. They had to be. So that's where your brain defaults when it has any spare capacity. This was one of the real mysteries of the brain for many, many years. Why the brain, its consumption of our energy is about 20%. And it's only 2% of our mass, but it uses 20% of our energy day in, day out, hour in, hour out. If you're sitting there doing nothing, slump in your chair, your brain doesn't relax. Your brain still uses 20% of your total energy. Why is that? Well, as your focus on a task goes down, when you complete a project and your task network shuts down, your default mode network uses any spare capacity to crank itself up. And the default mode network defaults to misery, not feeling very happy, and worrying about me. Now, again, it was really adaptive for your ancestors to worry about me, especially the me of the past and the me of the future. The me of the past almost got eaten by that tiger last week, so I need to memorize all the details of the tiger. And I'll be walking through the savannah in that same area tomorrow, so I need to think about the future and about how to avoid the tiger that might be there tomorrow. So the default mode network takes you out of the present moment and takes you into the past, into the future, and usually there you find anxiety, depression, and suffering. And that part of the brain is governed by a chunk of tissue right behind your eyes over here, center of your forehead, called the mid-prefrontal cortex. So we find in people who are depressed, who are anxious, their mid-prefrontal cortex is highly active, and their limbic system, their fight-or-flight system, their emotional brain, is highly active. They're part of their brain that constructs their sense of self and is focused on the negative, on future, on past. The default mode network is highly active in those people, and it links up with the emotional midbrain. So they aren't just feeling negative, they're thinking negative thoughts. A famous study by 2 renowned Harvard psychologists found that our brains are in negative thinking mode 47% of the time. And their immortal phrase in their paper is, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. When the brain is doing nothing, the mind is wandering, and then it wanders into the bad stuff of the past and the bad stuff that might happen in the future. So there you want to have inner peace. This is driving you crazy. You go take a meditation class and you close your eyes. And then what happens? The default mode network takes over. You think about the bad stuff of yesterday, get anxious about what will happen tomorrow, and you're out of that inner peace. So how do these Tibetan monks, how do these Franciscan nuns, how do these Qigong masters, how do these faith healers, how do these Peruvian shamans learn to shift themselves? They literally learn to shut down the default mode network and liberate themselves from that, it's called self-referential thinking, And then they learn to control the emotional midbrain. They control that negative thinking. So the amount of negative thinking they do goes way down. Now, if you do this every day for 20, 30, 40 minutes, not even an hour, your brain anatomy starts to change. I'm not talking about physiology. I'm not talking about the way it works. I'm talking about the hardwiring inside. And in one absolutely stunning case history I share with you in Bliss Brain, this TV producer decided to try mindfulness and meditation and do an 8-week course. Now, he was a TV reporter, so he took his whole crew with him into a big-time university laboratory, and he got tested. He got high-resolution MRI scans, measuring neuron by neuron the density and the size of each part of his brain. He took a huge number of cognitive tests. They did a whole workup on him. And then after that extensive workup, he then began his 8-week meditation journey. After just 2 weeks, he felt much less stressed. After 8 weeks, he went back into the lab. They ran all the same tests on him, and they found that his brain was denser and heavier. Some regions were denser and heavier by 2%, others by 4%. So in just 8 weeks, some parts of his brain had grown by up to 4%. But there was one part of his brain that grew like crazy. And it's a little C-shaped sliver of tissue right in the center of your emotional regulation area. It's called the dentate gyrus. And it's responsible for coordinating emotional regulation among different brain regions. In 8 weeks, this man's name is Graham Phillips. In 8 weeks, Graham Phillips's dentate gyrus, responsible for emotional coordination among many different regions of the brain, his dentate gyrus grew by 22.8%. It was a fifth bigger. The hardware he had to regulate negative emotion, that drives you nuts and stops you having a peace. You can do a lot with a dentate gyrus that's 22.8% bigger, and it only took him 8 weeks. In another study I did with colleagues of mine at Bond University, the researchers were absolutely amazed. They found that in just 4 weeks of doing the meditation you'll find on the Copperfield's website, so we're putting that meditation up there for you, buy your copy of Bliss Brain at Copperfield's using that link, and you'll get that meditation as well, the one we used in the study. The researchers found they looked at people's brain function after 4 weeks of using that meditation that you'll get as part of your book purchase. They looked at people's brain function, and they found that that part of the brain that causes suffering, the mid-prefrontal cortex, after just 4 weeks, shut down. It had changed the whole way it functioned in only 4 weeks. But not all the parts of these people's brains shut down. One part of the brain lit up, and that's part of the brain called the insula. And the insula has a lot of different functions, but one of the big ones is compassion, love, kindness. This is the part of the brain that governs social interactions. And these people had a kind, loving brain, and they were having these blissful experiences of oneness with the universe. And that brain change happened in only 4 weeks. So I want to encourage you to use this stuff. I'll do a meditation with you very briefly after our question and answer period. We'll do a very brief meditation. The one you'll get on the Copperfield site is longer. It's the same 22-minute meditation that the people used in that study that showed literally remodeled their brains in 4 weeks. Now, if you keep this up month after month, year after year, your brain remodeling is extensive. In fact, they find in these studies of Tibetan monks that the amygdala, the brain's fire alarm, the most crucial part of the fight or flight response that signals the whole body to freak out, in those Tibetan monks, the amygdala literally begins to shrivel because they just aren't using the fight or flight response anymore. They're habitually calm. I'm calm when there's a fire. I'm calm when there's smoke. I'm calm when I had to have that operation after the tub's laying fire. I'm calm when I have to face the challenges of life because I meditate and I'm resilient. And that's why the subtitle of Bliss Brain is the neuroscience of remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity, and joy. Now, before I end and take questions, I'll just mention creativity as well. So one of the criticisms of meditation is, well, these people are, they're Tibetan monks, they're Franciscan nuns, they're out there in the cloister. There's nothing really bad they have to deal with there. There's somebody taking care of them. Here I am, I'm in a stressful job, I have 3 kids. What do I do? And the answer is that you can learn to be as resilient as the monk is in the middle of an everyday life. I haven't had things particularly easy. I disclose in my book, EFT for PTSD, how I had a pretty difficult upbringing childhood, and I have scars on my body, and a lot of bad things happened when I was a kid in my life. And I wound up being anxious and miserable when I was a teenager. I joined a spiritual community when I was 15 years old to try and escape my own just desperate unhappiness, long-term depression, all these PTSD symptoms. I tried to meditate there, not very successfully. I didn't know much about science back then. In fact, nobody knew much about science 50 years ago. And in fact, in chapter 1 of Bliss Brain, I have one section called From 50 Years to 50 Minutes, because it's taken me 50 years to learn all this stuff. And I don't want it to take you 5 years or 50 months. I want you to have this stuff in your hand right now and be able to move to Bliss Brain. So I do retreats every year. I do a bunch of virtual events. I do a bunch of live events. We do events like 7-day retreats where people get together and we train them to acquire the same brainwave patterns as those Tibetan masters. We've done enough EEGs and MRIs of those masters now to know what their brain function is, and we can put you on an EEG and we can show you what that should be and train you to get there quickly. And on the first couple of days of the retreat, our EEGs show that people are getting there in 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, they're having a full-blown mystical experience. They're one with the divine. They're having these blissed out experiences. 5, 10, 15 minutes. Then around day 3 or 4, maybe 5, 6 minutes. We hooked one lady up at the end of the retreat. She was in a full-blown mystical state in 47 seconds. That's why in chapter 1 I say from 50 years to 50 seconds. I want you to have this stuff, and I don't want you to have to spend a long time stumbling around in the dark the way I did. And science really now gives us the information to get there quickly and efficiently. You'll feel the changes in your body the first time you do this. I had one lady walk up to me at a live event at Esalen where I was teaching a couple of years ago, and she said, "Dawson, I made a vow to myself I would use your meditation every single day without fail for 30 days. I said, "I'm so glad to hear that. And what day are you on right now?" She said, "I'm on day 167 of my 30 days. She just couldn't stop, because meditation done this way releases such a flood of pleasure hormones in your brain: oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, anandamide, nitric oxide, beta endorphin. And in fact, I'm doing now workshops on these 7 neurochemicals of ecstasy. These are some of the strongest drugs known to humankind. Your own body's beta endorphin is 3 times as strong as synthetic morphine. When you make anandamide in your own brain, it has the same chemical composition as THC, which is the active molecule in marijuana. When you fill your brain during meditation with serotonin and psilocybin, magic mushrooms, people are microdosing on magic mushrooms, they don't realize you can microdose every single day in meditation by boosting your serotonin, because psilocybin and serotonin have the same molecular structure and dock with the same receptor sites in your brain. So there you are meditating and you're feeling in bliss, and there's all this oxytocin and anandamide and nitric oxide and beta endorphin and serotonin, dopamine, all these things, wonderful things sloshing around in your brain, and you feel wonderful. That's why she got to the end of her 30 days and she was hooked on the super simple meditation and kept on going. So we see these images of these saints of old in Ecstasy. There's a wonderful image in the book of St. Francis, and he would go into these trances where he'd just be transported into bliss. He'd have this experience of being one with the universe. Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna in India in the late 1800s, he would just go into samadhi spontaneously. And suddenly he'd be walking down the street and go into samadhi. And he'd just freeze in whatever posture he was. He'd be giving a lecture at his home, he'd be having dinner, and he'd just freeze and maybe spend a few days in samadhi, after which he'd come back out again. Saint Teresa of Avila talks about, she uses sexual and marriage metaphors in her work. Hafiz, the Sufi as well, he talks about being ravished by the beloved. I mean, these people are having these orgasmic experiences of bliss. And the wonderful thing is, you can too. Even if there's the fire, even if there's the smoke, even if there's the pandemic, even if there's the election, even if there's the economic crash, you have this core of resilience. So before we take questions, I'll end with one other image I got right off the fire. And I share this image in the book. And I'm getting goosebumps, just chills, just thinking about this amazing image. So I told you our house burned down and the office building on the same property burned down as well. And so again, it was just a concrete slab with ash laying on top. The filing cabinets had burned, melted. The desks had burned. Everything had melted and burned, just all this ash. But in the middle of the ash sat a ceramic Buddha, sitting there, quiet, serene, in the middle of utter devastation. And the reason the Buddha was there was that about 10 years before, we'd been remodeling and we'd moved the Buddha, and someone had stuck this Buddha in a closet. And then we piled some files on top and near the Buddha, and then the Buddha got covered up. And so for 10 years, everyone had forgotten the Buddha was there. Until the fire burned down the whole building and the filing cabinets and everything in it. And there was the Buddha. And that image is in chapter 1. And that image to me symbolizes reality. The people who do these meditations say that the experience I had in meditation was more real than everyday reality. It made everyday reality seem like a dream. That's the real reality. The reality I know in Bliss Brain, the reality I know in these mystical experiences, that Ramakrishna reality, that Saint Teresa of Avila reality, that Saint Catherine of Siena mystical experience, that's what is reality. And so there's that image of the Buddha sitting there. And I wrote in my blog at that time, I said, there was the Buddha amid the ash, because that represents what cannot be burned, cannot be taken away from you, cannot be destroyed. Compassion? Can burning take away compassion? Can an operation or financial crash take away compassion? Not at all. Can it take away an ounce? Can it take away a nanoparticle of love in your heart? Not at all. Can it take away your altruism, your joy? Can it take away anything you've turned from a state into a trait? If you are a resilient person, all of those things endure. So not only that, you then use those challenges as a springboard for growth. And chapter 7 of Bliss Brain is all about post-traumatic growth. Because for a third of people who have a shattering trauma, they go into post-traumatic stress. They have flashbacks, they have nightmares, they can't easily recover. But 2/3 of people are resilient. They have post-traumatic growth, and like the Buddha, they use all of that tragedy as the fuel to transform their lives' journey. I want that for you. That's why I do what I do with such passion every day. I love waking up, going to Bliss Brain, and spending my days training people, inviting them to take a live workshop, inviting them to come to our website and use these techniques with a practitioner, to use them themselves. You want to be that kind of person who's continually remodeling your brain for resilience, creativity, and joy. So we'll take some questions. There's some in chat. Jamie will give us some others, and will go ahead and answer those, and then go into a very brief meditation as well.
Dawson, that was fantastic. I just love your whole aura, your whole message, the way that you took something that was, oh my gosh, so catastrophic and turned it into not only something that betters you, but can be used to help all of us. And I just think that's so admirable. I really enjoyed everything you had to say. And I can see from a lot of the comments that a lot of people here did too. Enough about what I have to say. Let's get to some questions. Okay, so Nikki says, hi, Dawson. And she's wondering, she says, thanks for sharing your incredible knowledge. My question is how to harmonize with any environment so that my actions and or behaviors don't appear out of context and or inappropriate to the situation.
Nikki, that is a really good question and a really big thing to focus on. So as you can tell, I'm sitting here. It's in the evening in California where I live, and I'm really happy, and I've had a really productive work day. I got up to meditate this morning, and I've certainly had one or two challenges during the day, but I'm basically a fundamentally happy person. Now, if I'm talking to my friend who has stage 4 cancer, would that be an appropriate energy to bring to the encounter? Absolutely not. If I'm doing a community Zoom with my community, because we have over 200,000 people on our email list, and I do a lot of Zoom events with them, and they're suffering. They're telling me about their jobs being lost, their houses losing value, all these problems they're having. Do I bring this to that encounter? No, I don't. I sit there and I listen empathetically. I reflect back, and I really allow myself to feel. Because if you just go in there being all blissed out, you can be completely out of tune with the people around you. So it's super important to tune in to your friends and family members. If they're suffering, just sit there, just listen. Now, what happens is that gradually things start to shift. I talk in my previous book from two years ago, Mind to Matter, about the whole phenomenon of emotional contagion. And after a while, after you have sat with them and you blended your energy with them, your naturally buoyant energy will start to lift the whole group. So for example, I did a keynote speech to about 1,000 people on last Friday, and I began by showing an image, NASA satellite imagery of the fires on the West Coast. Everyone's totally freaked out about those, and if you weren't freaked out about them before you saw the NASA satellite images, you definitely were afterwards. So I got everybody, just really in touch with their emotions initially. So I went there with 1,000 people initially. But by the end of an hour, they were just as high as can be on meditation and good energy, because I produced positive emotional contagion. And you want to be an agent of positive emotional contagion to all of those around you, but you start by meeting them where they are, and then your naturally buoyant, loving, compassionate, kind energy will then lift everyone around you.
Sorry, I was muted, but gosh, can you imagine? We need that today. Okay, so Ellen is wondering, what about the transition from being awake to trying to fall asleep? I find my thoughts move toward the negative while trying to fall asleep.
And that's because of the default mode network kicking in. Also, most people, when they wake up in the middle of the night, they often have negative thoughts. And I was just plagued by insomnia and negative thoughts myself for decades. I used to have a lot of nightmares and all the usual things about PTSD. And so what you have to do is, first of all, do the morning meditation practice. And then the useful way to extend that is find some way of being mindful throughout the day. And that really depends on you. I know one man I used to work with, this is before smart watches, he had his watch beeper set to go off and beep one time every hour. So I'd be in a meeting with this guy and suddenly beep. It was really weird. And I said, why do you do that every hour? He said, just to become mindful. So if you can give yourself little cues to become mindful, like I have a little image of the Buddha over here, here near my monitor, and just reminds me, that little image of the Buddha, to be mindful. I have an image of Jesus over here as well, to remind me to be mindful. I have a couple of other things. I'm going to ring a gong right now. It's like, now why on earth has this guy got a meditation gong in his office? To be mindful. So keep yourself mindful throughout the day. Then you'll go to sleep with more ability to shift those negative thoughts. What you then do is you can counter condition yourself to think positive ones. And just for example, I had somebody way back along the road, I was involved in a building transaction and I got swindled. And so I really had a lot of anger toward the guy who cheated me. And so I'd think of his name, Paul, and then I trained myself. I was obsessed with thinking about Paul. I was laying awake at night thinking about Paul. I was so angry at Paul. Paul. Now, again, my default mode network is meant to work that way because that's what kept your ancestors safe from the tiger. Except now, Paul's gone. Paul took the money and went to Florida. And so I'm just making myself miserable by thinking about Paul. So I trained myself to, whenever I think about Paul, to think about Mother Mary. So I'd start to say Paul, and when I'd say Paul in my mind, I thought Mother Mary. Paul, Mother Mary, Paul, Mother Mary, about 1,000 times a day, until eventually I had built enough neural wiring in my head to associate Paul with Mother Mary, and then I no longer had that negative thought. So what you do when you're heading for sleep, those negative thoughts arise, you quickly focus on someone. Now, someone doesn't have to be a religious figure. It could be Martin Luther King, could be Winston Churchill, it could be FDR, it could be a historical figure that you really admire. It could be Mother Teresa. So it doesn't have to be a certain kind of a person. It can be an archetypal figure. But what you do is you invoke that figure, and then the moment you have any negative thinking, you immediately go to that archetype, and then that in psychology this is called counter conditioning. You counter condition yourself, and I do this now to the point where when I wake up at night and I'm thinking negative thoughts, I immediately just go into thinking about my guides, saints, and suddenly I'm back in Bliss Brain. It did, though, take me practice to do that.
And real quick, I did share the website, the EFT Universe /Meditations3. These are the meditations you're speaking about, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and share that again in the chat just so all of you know where to find it. Okay, let's see. We've got a question from an anonymous attendee, and bear with me, it's a little bit long. Interesting and provocative information. Thank you for sharing. My question, I was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at 55. I am well educated, had a successful, productive career for 30 years. How do I utilize this medication to rewire my brain to accommodate my declining memory and cognitive skills? How do I manage negative emotions that may not be controllable being caused by disease if my brain is already changing anatomically? Good question.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that you've been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. My father was as well and died of Alzheimer's, and it was just really painful for all of us in the family to have to live with that for like 15, 20 years. It was really, really difficult. So I totally get where you're coming from. Now, one of the amazing pieces of research done recently, well, I'll give you the bad news and the good news. The bad news is there was a study published, let's see, it's September, in late June, early July. And the researchers looked at the correlation of various factors with Alzheimer's disease. And what they were looking was, they were looking at the buildup of beta amyloid and tau plaques in the brain. And I won't go into great detail about what those are. You know what beta amyloid plaques are. Beta amyloid plaques accumulate in the brains of Alzheimer's patients, and they're kind of like sticky, gooey tar. And what happens is the neurons can't send signals properly through this tar, and the tar accumulates and these plaques build up, shutting down parts of the brain, and the decline is progressive. So this study showed, it was a stunning study, showed that people who think negatively actually have more beta amyloid plaque formation in their brains, and the greater the negative thinking, the greater their formation of beta amyloid plaque. So that's the bad news. But the good news in the bad news there is that deal with negative thinking, use EFT tapping, use meditation, reduce your positive thinking, maybe eliminate your positive thinking, be relentlessly positive. I mean, you read Bliss Brain, you'll realize I am just absolutely, there's nothing that's going to stand between me and a positive outlook on life. So you want to be relentlessly positive for your own health. Now, the second thing is that in my book, Mind to Matter, I really encourage you to read the Harvard study there by, what was the, is either, anyway, just look up the index, Alzheimer's. And what they found is that in that preliminary study they did at Harvard, they were using mice there. And what they were doing was they found that mice who had Alzheimer's had very little gamma brain waves in their brain. Now, that's the exact brain wave that is generated the strongest by this meditation. So these mice that had no gamma or very little gamma then had much quicker development of Alzheimer's. So what they did was they took an experimental group of mice and they exposed them to gamma. Initially, it was through, actually, I won't get into the details of how they exposed them to gamma. Just it was at that brainwave frequency of gamma. Now, get the finding of this study. 50% of the beta amyloid plaques in the brains of those mice, was in the occipital lobe of the brain, 50% of their Alzheimer's plaques disappeared in 1 hour of gamma, in 1 hour. And what they found was glial cells were stimulated, and again, I won't get into all the details here, there's a lot of detail there. They then did a replication of that study, and now people are learning that they can generate huge amounts of gamma. These monks doing this work are generating 25 times the amount of gamma as the average person. They're generating crazy amounts of gamma, and gamma is the frequency that clears beta amyloid plaques from your brain by stimulating the activity of the glial cells that clear up and clean up those beta amyloid plaques. So read Mind to Matter, check out the section on Alzheimer's, and I mean, you'll be amazed at how much you can do to shift that reality.
Well, that was a really great answer. It looks like, sorry, I've been sharing some stuff here. We've got one last little question before we can get into the meditation, and it's a bit more personal to you. How long did it take you to recover from your house burning down?
Well, that meditation, sitting with my wife in the motel in Fort Bragg and saying, "You need to meditate," and we meditated, and then laughing about the massage chair. That was about 2 days afterwards. So we began to really laugh at some of the rubbish we'd lost in our house. 2 days later, we were just laughing about it. I mean, we were still sad, but we began to see, elements of positive change. I then, a week later, flew to Vancouver to keynote a conference. I was scheduled to keynote a conference and teach a week-long class to therapists on the topic of psychological trauma. So I stood up there a week after the house burned down, and there I was giving a keynote speech to a room full of therapists who were looking at me thinking, wow, is this guy for real? It was such a funny experience doing that and then teaching this week-long trauma class. But it was gradual, like 2 or 3 months. We got good trauma therapy. I teach this, but I also asked some of my friends who are trauma therapists to work with me. So they was using advanced techniques, like there's one technique called advanced energy therapies, and we use EFT. And if you want to get an EFT session right away, there's a 24/7 service called Tapping Place, where our certified practitioners will do this for you. If there's someone online, they'll do it with you any time of the day or night. So you go to Tapping Place, you can get a free session to start with there, but on Tapping Place, you can just tap with somebody right away. So we did that, and then for me, I felt pretty much recovered in about 2 months. And then my wife was probably 3 or 4 months, and some things like the death of our animals were all incinerated, and that really, it was hard for her to get over. So a few months, and then on the anniversary of the fire, a year later, October 9th, 2018, we had extensive sessions with therapists who were friends of ours again, because we wanted to use the anniversary of the fire to both deal with any last lingering stuff we had around the fire and also reinforce our post-traumatic growth. And that's what research does show, that in the 2 to 6 months after a traumatic stress, most resilient people are able to recover. Not only recover, very often that resilience and knowing they have survived a tragedy makes them even more resilient in the face of future tragedy.
Well, that's good news, and we're thrilled to hear that. Why don't we go ahead and get into our meditation mind frame and wind down the rest of the event with this practice.
And we won't do anything other than the meditation afterwards. We'll let you just sort of drift off into your evening and go to sleep if that feels good to you. This meditation, though, actually will make you fairly alert but balanced, because it produces the secretion of nitric oxide in your brain, which will actually make you more focused. So, but after that, we'll just wind down. We'll wind up with a closing circle in consciousness, take 3 deep breaths together, and then we'll end the call. And don't forget, make sure you're at Copperfield's to get your book. Make sure you support your independent local bookstore. It's really important. These are members of our community in a way in which big national chains and other places are not. So support your community, support your store. Use those links that Jamie's put there in chat in the next while.
I will, sorry to cut you off. I love that we're going to end like that. I will be sending around a follow-up email that will include further links to purchase this book. It will include a link to watch this again and again, and also the 10% discount code. So thanks.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate that. So start with your eyes open. We'll use a little bit of acupressure first. And again, these are just acupuncture meridians in our body. We'll start over here and tap lightly with 3 fingers on the side of your hand. Again, eyes open, and just visualize all the stress leaving your body. Imagine stress like a fluid flowing out now through your feet, flowing from the top of your head, out of your feet. And then there are 12 meridians. We'll tap on most of them. We'll tap on your governing meridian on top of your head, 2 or 3 fingers on the center line of your head, eyes open, visualizing your stress leaving. And tap on your eyebrow point where it meets the bridge of your nose. That's your bladder meridian. Again, all stress leaves your body. Tap on the side of your eye, your gallbladder meridian. Tap under your eye on your stomach meridian. Tap on the end point of your governing meridian under your nose. Tap on the end point of your central meridian on your chin. And tap where your collarbone meets your breastbone over here. Kidney meridian is the last of the tension leaves your body. One last time on the side of your hand. Close your eyes, stop tapping, relax. With your body now free of tension. And feel your breath flowing in and out. And imagine your breath is flowing in and out through your heart. And slow your breathing down to 6 seconds per in-breath and 6 seconds per out-breath. Breathing in through your heart, 6 seconds. Breathing out through your heart, 6 seconds. Relax your tongue and let it rest lightly on the floor of your mouth. And imagine a big, empty space behind your eyes, between your eyes, filling your whole head. And imagine the love and light of the universe pouring in through the top of your head, filling your body with vitality, filling your energy centers with vibrance, filling your heart as you breathe in and out through your heart. Notice how relaxed your tongue is on the floor of your mouth. Notice the infinite space between your eyes. Notice the energy beam of life pouring in through the top of your head, illuminating your body and your heart. Feel the energy of your heart as you breathe through your heart. 6 seconds in and 6 seconds out. And now send a ray of your heart energy to a person who makes you feel unconditionally loved. It could be a saint, it could be an archetype, it could be a historical figure. And when you think of this person, you feel from them a sense of unconditional love. And this beam of energy, this beam of your heart energy now connects you with that person. Make that beam of energy bigger and stronger. And notice the color, shape, and texture of this big, strong energy beam of love, of compassion, connecting you with that source of unconditional love. Even as the love of the universe flows in through the top of your head. Now broaden your heart energy beam to be like the rays of the sun shining out in all directions and connecting with every single atom in the universe. Your heart energy now radiates out from your heart, sending love and compassion to every single atom in the universe. Filling every single atom in the universe with love and compassion from your heart. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Infinite space between your eyes. Feeling the light of the universe pouring down to the top of your head as your heart sends compassion to every single atom in the universe. Now gently detach from all the atoms of the universe and focus your heart energy beam in a tight ray on just that one person that's the source for you of unconditional love. So now your heart energy is extending out from your body only toward that one person from whom you feel unconditional love. Now gently detach your energy beam from that person and bring it all the way back inside your own heart. Feel your heart energy entirely back inside your own body. Entirely back inside your own heart. Tongue relaxed on the floor of your mouth. Infinite space between your eyes. Breathing through your heart, 6 seconds in and 6 seconds out. And now with your eyes closed, feel how good your body feels. Feel how wonderful it feels to be at peace, to be letting go of everyday life and blending with the universe. Shutting down the suffering self and surrendering to the light and love of the universe. Feel this feeling in your body. Feel how good it feels. And to end with, we'll do the tapping routine again with eyes closed to cement this feeling in your body. And I'll say some affirmations for you as well. So tap on the side of your hand. And the affirmation here is, I feel good. I feel good in my body, my mind, my emotions, and my energy field. I produce this feeling all by myself with just 15 minutes of meditation. And I can produce this good feeling in my body by myself anytime I choose. Top of the head, this feeling is mine. I choose to feel this good every day. Eyebrow point. And I release any and every other possibility. Side of the eye. And I surrender myself to feeling wonderful. Under your eye, I choose to surrender myself every day to release my tension under the nose, tapping under the nose, and return to center. Chin, I choose to feel this good every day. Tap on your collarbone point. I created this good feeling in my body. And I create it anytime I choose. Once more on the side of your hand. And I release any and every other possibility. Stop tapping, relax your hands. Feel again how good your body feels. Now we've tapped in those positive feelings. And with the next 2 breaths, prepare to return your attention back to the here and now, back to your environment. With the next breath, open your eyes, look around you. Notice the smallest cylindrical object in your environment. Notice the biggest green object in your environment. Just welcome yourself back to your body. See how much better you feel, how good you can feel. You're producing all of these 7 neurochemicals of bliss in your brain, and you just feel wonderful and motivated to produce them in your brain every day. So to end with, we will go ahead and take 3 deep breaths together, eyes open, and just imagine connecting with everyone else. So tune into your heart, take the first breath, and also imagine connecting with everyone else who is on this call or will be on this call at any other time. And imagine us being part of a community of love and compassion and well-being and exuberance. Bliss Brain can be yours every day. And then with the last breath, just imagine everyone around, reach out your arms and imagine we're all touching our fingertips in this wonderful community of love, sharing and caring. We truly are all one. And as we meditate in the morning, we can connect on those invisible levels of consciousness with every person of goodwill and kindness on the planet. Thank you so much for being here for a brief experience of Bliss Brain with me. And I see you being in that state joyfully every single day of your life. Thank you.